Welcome to Swords and Hammers. Truth comes clothed in tales, and the soul remembers what the mind alone forgets. The world is loud, but for the next few minutes, it can wait. Take a moment. Settle yourself. Listen well. Come, let us begin. The Camp of Whispering Fires. A tale of murmuring, gossip, and the judge at the door. The first time the camp turned sour, it began at the cook fire, and not on the field. Someone muttered that the king must be feasting in marble halls while we licked the bottom of the pot. The line drew a laugh, and laughter is the easiest gate through which poison enters. I was the one who repeated it to the next fire, putting a sharper edge on the words for flavor. By habit, I kept grievances, weighed slights, and scratched little jokes that made hard men snort ale through their noses. Steel makes a certain kind of soldier, but a clever tongue makes another, and I liked the second kind better. The march had been long, the river low, the sky stingy with clouds, and the hills around us miserly with shade. In such a mood, complaint feels like fellowship, and gossip feels like intimacy, improved by a little wickedness. Around one fire, the talk was about rations and missing sacks no one had seen, but everyone had heard about. Around another, the subject was our captain, his supposed soft bedroll, and the way he prayed short prayers before long orders. I supplied the finishing strokes whenever a story needed color, the extra word that turned concern into contempt. The old chaplain had warned us once that the tongue is a spark tossed into dry grass. He said the Lord weighs every word the way a quartermaster weighs grain, noting leaks and thefts, whether men admit them or not. At the time, I had grinned and called back that my tongue could not burn more than the cook's stew already had. The next day, we held the ridge above a narrow ravine, stones loose underfoot, and scrub trees scratching at our greaves. The captain walked the line with steady pace, reminding each knot of men where to hold and when to yield. His voice carried calm, but the whispers that followed him carried something colder. "Easy words for a man with a full belly," someone near me said in a low voice. Another replied that our captain loved the high ground because it gave him a head start when he chose to run. The jest was mine, born by the cook fire, and now come home to roost on my own tongue. The men around us chuckled, and in that chuckle, the line lost a little of its spine. Signals came from the scouts, sharp gestures against the sky, and horns called us to ready spears and fix shields. The enemy rose from the ravine mouth in a grey wave, more than we had hoped and closer than we liked. Orders ran down the ridge, clear and hard, to shift weight from one flank to the other in measured steps. Where the captain's voice reached first, men moved like a single body with many limbs. Where the laughter had been thickest, men hesitated to obey a voice they no longer honored. It takes only a heartbeat to ask such questions, but a heartbeat is all an arrow needs to find a gap. Our line bent there, where my jest had taken root, and the enemy's shafts found the opening as if invited. A boy named Wren, who had never once spoken ill of anyone louder than a murmur to himself, fell beside me. We shoved forward and held the ridge in the end, piling bodies at its foot until the ravine seemed choked with regret. Yet even as we drove the enemy back, I could taste ashes in my mouth that had nothing to do with smoke. At dusk, the order came to gather at first light in the hollow between the hills for a reckoning. No one called it judgment. but the word walked beside us all night like a silent companion. Sin does not grow tired when men do. Morning found us standing in a rough square, armor dulled, eyes red, banners hanging with none of yesterday's pretense. In the center stood the captain, the chaplain, and a single shield planted upright in the earth with no man behind it. Wren's name had been painted on the inside, in hurried strokes that had not yet fully dried. The sight of that empty shield spoke more clearly than any horn could have done. The captain's words were spare, like a man counting real coin rather than boasting of riches he did not have. He described where the line had held, where it had bent, and where it had nearly broken. Then he said, "Our failure began before the enemy rose, when some of you decided. That complaint was wiser than obedience." The chaplain lifted his staff and let his gaze travel the square, as if he were reading faces, as one reads a page. "The one who judges us stood at the edge of that ravine yesterday," he said. "He heard every shout and every groan, but he also heard what you said in the dark when you thought no one was listening. You have not only wounded each other, you have accused his providence and mocked his care. Confession is a hard road, yet it is shorter than the path of excuses that loops on forever." I stepped forward before my courage failed. "Sir," I said, though the word scraped my throat, "the jest about your running came from my mouth first." Once opened, the gate refused to close. More admissions pushed through like prisoners smelling air. I named the fires where I had sharpened complaints, the men I had entertained with stories that stripped honor from those set over us. Silence followed, not the sulking silence of offended pride, but the held breath that waits to see whether a blow or mercy will fall. The captain studied me with an expression that mixed sorrow and something sterner. Instead, he pointed to Wren's empty shield. "You will carry that," he said, "on every march and every watch until I release you. You will stand where the wind is hardest and the ground most thankless, and you will keep your tongue as still as that iron. Perhaps then you will learn that the Lord lent you speech to bless and not to stab." His judgment fell heavy, yet some hidden lock in my chest clicked open under its weight. From that day, I went nowhere without Wren's shield biting into my shoulder. When men began to grumble about the trail or the fare, they looked to me for the expected spark. I felt my old words rise, then break against the memory of Wren's lifted hand, and then his fall. Instead, I found other sentences, clumsy at first, like a smith striking true metal after years of bending tin. "We are hungry," I would say, "yet still given strength enough to walk. Let us thank the giver before we curse the bowl." Or when rumor about stolen grain tried to seep back into the cracks, I answered, "If wrong has been done, bring it into the open light, not into corners where shadows grow longer." Some men frowned, missing the easy fellowship of shared bitterness, but others looked strangely relieved. The ordinary tasks became my lessons. Drawing water, I prayed that my speech would be as clear and measured as the rope that lowered the bucket. Sharpening blades, I asked that my tongue would only cut what the healer himself pressed it against. Every ache from Wren's shield reminded me that careless talk always lands on some other man's flesh. Weeks later, the sky finally softened, trading its hard brightness for a low blanket of waiting grey. Rain came not as a storm of rage, but as a long, steady patience, soaking cloak and banner, hill and hollow alike. I tilted Wren's shield to catch the falling water, and watched it bead and run along the rim like tears that finally had permission. A line rose in my heart then, clear as a horn call. When the Lord stills your tongue, it is not to leave you silent, but to teach you a better song. That day, the camp sounded different, with more thanks and fewer daggers made of breath. I do not claim that my tongue is tamed. Old habits prowl like wolves beyond the ring of light. Yet now, when I hear the first hiss of gossip or the weary drag of complaint, I remember the ravine and the empty shield. It takes more courage to bite back one bitter word than to swing a sword in any battle. You have not truly turned until your tongue has turned with you. And when the great captain calls the final roll, I hope he finds in my mouth not the taste of ashes, but the low, steady fire of gratitude, ready to rise into praise. Selah.